part 4, the study of man. Part 5. So we have multiple chapters again of part 5. So chapter 1 is the ground for the discussion. Like the ancient sages, the Oriental philosophers hold the maxim, know thyself, to be one of vital importance to the traveler on the road of life. A considerable portion thereof of their speculative treatises is invariably devoted to the study of mankind. Much difference of opinion exists as to the point of view from which man is to be discussed. The religious teachers asserting that since God created him from nothing, he may be considered as an actual being whose characteristics are capable of diagnosis and definition. The metaphysicians, on the other hand, say that it is impossible for that which is not to be, or for that which is not to be. They allow, however, that that which is may assume various forms and manifest itself in different ways, and prefer considering man as a particular manifestation of the one universal existence of God. Both, however, agree in their propriety of the discussion, though upon different grounds. Man constitutes the lesser world, and everything that is not man is included in the greater world. And since everything in the greater world has its counterpart in the lesser, the study of this is a duty incumbent upon all who aspire to spiritual knowledge. To know oneself is the right way. Sirat al-Mustaqim, for guidance, in which Muhammad besought God in his prayer. Guide us into the right way. Quran, Surah 1, Ayat 5. Self-knowledge is the shortest road to, that's part of the verse, to the knowledge of God. When Ali asked Muhammad, "What am I to do that I may not waste my time?" the Prophet answered, "Learn to know thyself." Chapter 2 of the origin and animal development of man. The lesser world is the counterpart of the greater. In the greater world, there are 4 sources, namely the nature of God, the constructive spirit, our primal element, the invisible and the sensible world. The nature of God begets, the constructive spirit conceives, and the offspring is the tracts of heaven and the elements. The tract of heaven again beget, and the elements conceive, and their offspring is the triple kingdom, animal, vegetable, and mineral. In like manner, there are 4 seasons in the lesser world, namely male and female generation, and the body and soul of man. But the constructive spirit is identical with primal intelligence. Therefore, when man has attained to intelligence, he has completed his upward progress. Aruj, I think, I'm not sure which language we're using here. Is it Farsi or Arabic? And so is it a Roj, or and reach the point from which he started. The circle thus complete, but intelligence is in direct communication with God. As-salat is direct communication with God. Therefore, when man has attained to this point, he has also attained to God. From him is the beginning, and unto him is the return. The saying, Muhammad, he who has seen me has seen God, refers to this, not to any blasphemous assumption of a divinity, for we must bear in mind that he is identified by his followers with primal intelligence. It is unnecessary here to describe the first germination of the embryo. The curious will find a particular account of it. According to the Islamic theory, in George O'Sale's translation of Al-Quran, he lists this connected to Surah 22, 8, 5. And Muslimin are more likely to link this to Surah 96. Suffice to say that according to them, the cartilages, arteries, and nerves are formed during the first 3 months after conception. In the 4th month, while the sun is in the ascendant, the first germ of life appears. The limbs and members are next formed, nourished by blood, introduced through the placenta by means of the umbilical cord. These are followed by the successive developments of the body and the soul, which arrive at perfection in the 8th month. In the 9th, when Jupiter is in the ascendant, the child is born into the world. How does that make sense? That Jupiter's whatever position it is in the sky, it doesn't depend on, it doesn't have, it doesn't move through the sky quick enough to show this stuff. The embryo partakes of all four elements: earth, water, air, and fire. Now these in the greater world produce a triple offspring: mineral, vegetable, and animal. A similar division is therefore made in the human body. The members and limbs which are first born partake of the four elements in different proportions, and the combined result corresponds to the mineral kingdom. The powers of attraction, contraction, absorption, digestion, rejection, growth, and formation are next developed in the members and limbs, which then require nourishment. This they receive in the shape of blood introduced through the placenta. The cheme contained in this becoming matured is developed into the vegetative spirit corresponding to the second division of the three kingdoms. When the digestive and other internal organs have become fully developed, the heart attracts to itself the essence of this vegetative spirit, and having further matured it, forms the life. The essence of this again is attracted to the brain, where after being matured is developed into the soul, and the remainder dispersed through the nerves to the limbs, where it becomes the source and sense of motion. This corresponds to the animal kingdom of the greater world. Each of these developments occupies 1 month: embryo, mineral, vegetable, vegetative, and animal. These are 10 in number, 5 external and 5 internal. The external senses are sight, hearing, taste, smelling, and feeling. The internal senses are common sense, hasa, mushtarak, imagination, kial, apprehension, wahum, memory, haftha, reflection, mutsarafa. I don't know what vowels, and I don't know whether we're using the V or the W sound. The common sense is involved in the imagination and the apprehension in the memory. The two former are situate in the fore part of the brain, the two latter in the after part, and the reflection occupies the middle. The common sense is so called from compromising everything that perceives the outward senses. It comprehends visible objects, while the apprehension apprehends invisible subjects. It is the common sense which appreciates the real nature of all that the external senses perceive, as for instance distinguishing a friend from the enemy by the marks of which the external senses take cognizance. The reflection is that which similarly appreciates the conceptions of the imagination. The motive powers are also of two kinds: causative and active. The active powers are subservient to and obey the causative, producing motion and the like at their instigation. The causative powers exercise two distinct functions, namely attraction for the acquirement of pleasure or usefulness, and repulsion for the avoidance of annoyance or harm. The former is called lust, the latter indignation. Hitherto, only those qualities of man have been treated of which he shares in common with the other animals. His spiritual and intellectual developments require another chapter. And chapter 3 of this is, part 5 is of the intellectual and spiritual development of man. Every animal possesses a vegetative spirit, a living spirit, and an instinctive spirit, but man has an additional inheritance, namely the spirit of humanity. Now this was breathed into God. This is breathed by God into man directly from himself, and is therefore the same character as the primal element. And when I have fashioned him and breathed my spirit into him, Al-Quran, Surah 15, 829, the Sufis do not interpret this of the life, but of the spirit of humanity, and say that it is frequently not attained until a late period of life, 30 or even 80 years before man can receive this spirit of humanity. He must be furnished with capacity which is only to be acquired by purifying oneself from all evil and immoral qualities and dispositions, and adorning oneself with the opposite ones. Sheikh Muhyiddin ibn al-Arabi, in his investigation, Fasos, again, I'm not sure, says that the words, when I have fashioned him, refers to this preparation, and the rest of the sentence, and breathe my spirit into him, refers to the accession of the spirit of humanity. Two conditions are therefore imposed upon the traveler: first, to attain humanity; second, to acquire capacity. There are three developments of character that must be suppressed before man can attain to humanity: the animal, the brutal, and the fiendish. He who only eats and sleeps and gives way to lust is mere animal, but if he, besides these, he gives way to anger and cruelty, if he is brutal, and if in addition to all these he is crafty, lying, and deceitful, he is fiendish. If the traveler is moderate in his food, rest, and desires, and strives to attain a knowledge of himself and of God, then is the time for acquiring capacity by freeing himself from all that is evil and base, and adorning himself with the opposite qualities. After that, by prayer, he may obtain the spirit of humanity. Someone has truly said that there is none of the perfection, essence, or immortality of man, save only among such as are created with a godly disposition. When the traveler has once been revivified by the spirit of humanity, he becomes immortal and inherits everlasting life. This is why it has been said that man has a beginning but no end. If, when he has attained this spirit of humanity, he is earnest and does not waste his life in trifling, he soon arrives at the divine light itself, for God guideth whom he pleaseth into his light. The attainment of this light is the completion of man's upward progress, but no one can attain to it but those who are pure in spirit and in their lives. Muhammad asserted that he himself had attained it. To light I have reached, and in light I live. Now this light is the nature of God, wherefore he said, who seeth me, see God. The germ that contains the primal element of man is the lowest of the low, and the divine light is the highest of the high. It is between these extremes that the stages of man's upward or downward progress lie. We have created man in the fairest of proportions, and then have thrown him back to the lowest of the low, save only such as believe and act with righteousness, and verily these shall have the reward. Al-Quran, Surah 95, 4. This reward is said by the Sufis to be defined in the word atrat, reward itself. The word contains three radical letters: Aleph, Jim, and Ra. Aleph stands for Adama, return. Adat is return. Jim for Jannah, paradise hereafter. Ra for Rawaya, those who have handed down the faith. Their acting righteously is the return to the nature of God. For when they have finished their upward progress and reached this, they are in paradise, and in the presence of their God. He, therefore, is a man, in the truest sense of the word, who, being sent down upon earth, strives upward toward heaven. These aspirations are indispensable to man. He might, by the almighty power of God, exist without all beside, even had the heavens and the elements themselves never been. But these things are the aim and want of all. It has been said that the primal element, our constructive spirit, as well as the spirit of humanity, proceed direct from God. They are therefore identical and are both included by the Sufis in the one term concomitant spirit. Now this spirit, although distinct and individual, comprehends and governs the entire universe. The simple natures are its administrators and exponents. Of these, the seven sires beget, the four mothers conceive from the incarnation of this spirit in them, and their offspring is the triple kingdom, mineral, vegetable, and animal. And so it is with the lesser world of man. Now this spirit hath two functions, external and internal. External is revealed in the material generation, just alluded to. The internal abides in the heart of man. Whosoever purifies his heart from worldly impressions and desires reveals this internal function of the spirit within him and illumines and revivifies the soul. See, that's what's meant by Illuminati, not, not the group that died in the 1700s. Thus the spirit at once comprehends the universe and dwells in the heart of man. Chapter 4 of 5. The upward progress or ascent of man. When man has become assured of the truth of revelation, he has reached the stage of belief, and as the name of movement, believer. When he further acts in obedience to the will of God and apportions the night and day for earnest prayer, he has reached the stage of worship and is called an abbot or worshiper. When he has expelled the love of this world from his heart and occupies himself with the contemplation of the mighty whole, he reaches the next stage and becomes a zahid or recluse. When in addition to all this, he knows God and subsequently learns the mysteries of nature, he reaches the stage of acquaintance and is called arif, one who knows. The next stage is that in which he attains to the love of God and is called a wali or saint. When he is moreover gifted with inspiration and the power of working miracles, he becomes a nebi, prophet. And when entrusted next with the delivery of God's own message, he is called an apostle, rasul. When he is appointed to abrogate a previous dispensation and preach a new one, for the most part, it's not actually abrogating the previous dispensation, but it's the abrogating the changes to it. Sometimes there's something for that time or place, or in the case of Muhammad, an international age, it's not limiting things to any particular material culture or language, but I mean, the revelation and inspiration come in his own language, but you know what I mean. He is, but that's not a limiting factor, Ulul Azam, one who has a mission. When this mission is final, he has arrived at the stage called Khatam, or the seal. This is the upward progress of man. The first stage is the believer, the last, the seal. After the separation from the body, the soul of man returns to that heaven, which corresponds to the stage which he has attained. Thus, the believer at last dwells in the first or lowest heaven, and the seal in the heaven of heavens. For it will be noticed that the stages of upward progress correspond to the number of degrees in the heavenly spheres, namely 7 inferior and 2 superior. The metaphysicians say that these stages and degrees do not in reality exist, but that the heavenly intelligence, which corresponds to the degree of the intelligence attained by man, attracts and absorbs his soul into itself after separation from the body. Thus, everyone who has attained intelligence corresponding to that of the highest sphere, his soul returns thereto, and he who has attained intelligence corresponding to the lowest sphere, his soul in like manner returns to that. Those who have not attained intelligence corresponding to any of these will be placed in hell, which is situate below the lowest sphere. As each of the heavenly spheres is furnished with knowledge and purity in proportion to its position, the rank of man's soul in the future state will, according to this last account, be in proportion to his degree of knowledge and purity of life while upon the earth. The upward progress infinite. The Unitarians say that man's upward progress has no end, for if he strive for 1,000 years, each day will teach him something that he knew not before, inasmuch as the knowledge of God has no limit. So Muhammad says, he who progresses daily is yet a feeble mind. The religious account says that the soul of every man returns to an individual place after separation from the body. This the metaphysicians deny, for how say they, that the soul of a man returns to a certain place when it has not originally come from a certain place. The soul of man is the primal spirit, and if 1,000 persons live, it is the same spirit that animates them all. And in like manner, if 1,000 die, the same spirit returns to itself, and is not lessened or diminished. If a myriad persons build houses and make windows therein, the same sun illumines them all. And though every one of them should be destroyed, the sun would not be lessened or diminished. The sun is the Lord of the sensible world, lowercase Lord, right? And the exponent of the attributes of the primal spirit. The primal spirit is the Lord of the invisible world and the exponent of the nature of God. When we're seeing a hierarchy here, we're not seeing that different deities in the hierarchy. When the heart of man has been revivified and illumined by the primal spirit, he has arrived at intelligence, for intelligence is a light in the heart. Distinguishing between truth and vanity, until he has been so revivified and illumined, it is impossible for him to attain to intelligence at all. But having attained to intelligence, then and not till then is the time for the attainment of knowledge. For becoming wise, intelligence is a primal element, and knowledge is the attribute therefore. When from knowledge he has attained, successively proceeded to the attainment of the divine light and the acquaintance with the mysteries of nature, his last step will be perfection, with which his upward progress concludes. But dive he ever so deeply into the treasury of mysteries and knowledge, unless he examine himself and confess that after all he knows not, all that he has acquired will slip through his hands and leave him far poorer than before. His treasure of today should as much exceed the treasure of yesterday as an ocean exceeds a drop, but this can never be unless he, leaving all else for contemplation and self-examination, have freedom and leisure to learn how poorly he really is and how much he needs the saving help of God. One class of Unitarians explains the upward progress of man thus. They say that every atom of existent beings is filled with light. Arise and look around, for every atom that has birth shines forth a lustrous beacon to illumine all the earth. But that man walks abroad in darkness, blinded by the lust of life, and laments the want of light that would, were he but aware of it, involve him in the glorious sheen of brightest day. 'Twere well to catch the odors that about our senses play, for all the world is full of blast to bear the sweets away. What they mean is this, that all existent beings are compounded of two things, darkness and light, which are indistinguishably blended together. The light belongs to the invisible and the darkness to the sensible world, but the two are intimately connected, and the former exercises a paramount influence upon the latter. The object of man, according to them, is to separate the light from the darkness, that its nature and attributes may be understood, and in this consists his upward progress. Although the light and darkness can never be entirely separated, for the one is, as it were, the veil of the other, the light can be made to prevail, so that its attributes may become manifest. Now it is possible to separate thus far the light from the darkness. In certain cases, in the bodies of men and animals, for instance, there are certain organs always at work whose sole object is this separation. Thus, when food is introduced into the stomach, the liver receives the cream and the essence of it and transmits it to the heart. The heart, in like manner, extracts the essence of this, which is the life, and transmits it to the brain. Lastly, the brain extracts the essence of this and transforms it into the elixir of life, the real light of all. The elixir evolved by the brain is the instinctive spirit, and as it were a lamp in a lantern, but it gives forth, after all, but a flickering and a cloudy light. And man's object should therefore be to strengthen and purify it by renunciation and contemplation until it give forth the true light, which is the spirit of humanity, When man has attained to this, he necessarily becomes free from all that is evil and is adorned instead with every good and noble quality. The body of man is like a lantern, the vegetative spirit is the lamp, the animal spirit is the wick, the instinctive spirit the oil, and the spirit of humanity the fire that kindles all. Verily, its oil would almost shine even though no fire kindled it. You know, that last phrase is part of Al-Quran, Surah 24, 35. In other words, the instinctive spirit should feed and supply the spirit of humanity. As the oil feeds and supplies the flame in a lamp, the traveler must aim at completing this lamp so that his heart may be illumined and he may see things as they really are. When the spirit of humanity is a light upon light, Al-Quran, Surah 24, 35, has thus kindled the instinctive spirit, God guideth whom he pleaseth to his own light. You know, same source. That is to the divine light of his own nature, reaching which the traveler's upward progress is complete. And for from him they spring, and unto him they return. And Alfred Tennyson's In Memoriam has a saying that each who seems a separate whole should move his rounds, infusing all. The skirts of self again should fall, emerging in the general soul. His faith is vague as all unsweet, eternal form shall still divide the eternal soul from all beside, and I shall know him when we meet. And chapter 5 of part 5 is just called Conclusions. The words quoted in the first chapter, I am a hidden treasure, and I would fain be known, form the basis of the whole system of sophistic speculation, considering the entire universe merely as a manifestation of God produced by the agency of intelligence directly proceeding from him. They rightly surmise that this intelligence is the only means by which he can be known. Now, man being with them the most perfect entity in the universe. Oh, okay, maybe some could be that perfecting, more likely. It's clearly the instrument by which the object of its creation is to be accomplished, but this object is that God should be known, and he can only be known through intelligence. Therefore, the attainment of this intelligence is the final aim of man. But as man sprung from the intelligence which originated the universe, and should, as has been just stated, tend to the same, the Sufis proceed to consider his existence as a circle meeting in the intelligence, which reveals, you know, what a Westerner would call Godhead. Just God, you know, not Godhead. Well, if you're a polytheist Sufi, but if you're Muslim Sufi, you don't believe in Godhead. This circle they divide into two arcs. The former, called descent, nuzul, includes every stage from the first scintillation from the original intelligence to the full development of man's reasoning powers. The latter arc, called ascent, uruj, includes every stage from his first use of reason for its true purpose to his final reabsorption into the divine intelligence. This is what is meant when they speak of the origin and return of man. The ascent or upward progress naturally presents itself to the sophistic mind in the form of a journey, and the doctrines which profess to describe it are accordingly called the road, Tariqat. When a man possessing the necessary requirements of fully developed reasoning powers turns to them for a resolution of his doubts and uncertainties concerning the real nature of God, he is called a talib, or searcher after God. If he manifests a further inclination to prosecute his inquiry according to their system, he is called a murid, or one who inclines, placing himself under the spiritual instruction of some eminent leader of the sect. He is fairly started upon his journey and becomes a salik, or a traveler, whose whole business in afterlife is saluk, or devotion, whereas the word signifies the prosecution of his journey, and to the end that he may ultimately arrive at the knowledge of God. And we see animals in cages still enacting their natural behaviors, seeking out the journeys that they would naturally do in life, but they don't as caged animals. So they run in wheels and flop about at corners and all that. And in some way, we humans are kind of like that too. Do we just give up, or do we, move about in place? Well, we can get stuff done. Spiritual exercises, it's called. And it can be the best thing, contained, right? Here, he is exhorted to serve God as the first step towards a knowledge of him. This is the first stage of his journey, and it's called abudiyat, service or worship. And in answer to his prayers, the divine influence or attraction has developed his inclination into love of God. He is said to have reached the stage called ishq, or love. This divine love, expelling all worldly desires from his heart, leads him to the next stage called zuhud, or seclusion, occupying himself henceforward with contemplations and the investigations of those metaphysical theories concerning the nature, attributes, and works of God, which have been described in the second part of this treatise. He reaches his next stage, which is that of ma'rifat, knowledge. Now, this assiduous contemplation of the startling metaphysical theories is exceedingly attractive to an Oriental mind, and not unfrequently produces a state of mental excitement akin to the phenomena observed during the recent religious revivals. Such state is considered a sure prognostication of direct illumination of the heart by God, and constitutes the next stage, wajd, or hal, ecstasy. During this stage, he is supposed to receive a revelation of the true nature of God, and is to have reached the stage called hakikat, or the truth. And I might want to bring up my Ekankar chart, right? The hakikat. Okay, I thought it was the Q sound. He is then said to receive to the stage of jam, or wasl, direct union with God. Further than this, he cannot go, but pursues his habit of self-denial and contemplation until his death, which is, however, merely looked upon as a total reabsorption into the deity, forming the consummation of his journey. The last stage, designated fana, extinction. And in the more basic, literal Islamic view, the fana is the extinction of the fana is the extinction of the self that is, not in submission to God. So all your beliefs, all your actions are fully in accord with God. And your identity is not as other than God's servant. All these other things are just things you use. But that stage in which he is said to have attained to love of God is the point of view from which the Sufistic poets love to discuss the doctrines of their sect. With them, man is the lover, God is the beloved one, and the journey above is described, is referred to allegorically as the distance which separates the lover from the object of his affection. The glossary to which I appendix this work will enable the student of Hafiz and other Sufistic writers to interpret for himself the mystical poems of the East. Thus far, we have followed the traveler upon this trackless path through every mystery, human and divine. One thing now remains: if we, like him, aspire to reach the goal, we must cast away the pride of intellect and boasted knowledge, and kneeling before the throne of God in humble thankfulness for the light he hath already vouchsafed, ask him for guidance and protection, who alone is the light and life of men. And